Quiscus didit nobis Bonaventura, preceptorem pastorem patronum.
Boni fiamus, ud boni fiamus. Zato, dragi brate in sestre, spoštovani udeleženci nocojšnjega večera, zato smo tukaj le zbrani. Ud boni fiamus, ud bonaventuriani fiamus. 8 stoletje, kar se je rodil ta veliki mož, mistik, mislec, voditelj, in iz različnih kotov smo se želeli ozreti nanj in zdelo se nam je primerno, da bi ob tej priložnosti se zgodila nocojšnja okrogla miza, v kateri bomo zaokrožili kar nekaj misli o tem, kdaj, kako je živel in zakaj sploh razmišljati o teh starih možeh. In pa zdelo se nam je primerno, da ob tej priložnosti tudi v našem jeziku, kjer je prisotnost Bonaventurove misli že navzoča kar nekaj stoletij, da tudi v naš jezik prelijemo to misel. Kajti, ko so v prejšnjih časih brali, študirali Bonaventura, ni bilo dvoma, vsi so ga lahko brali v njegovi šolski materinščini, ne v domači materinščini, torej v latinskem jeziku. Zdaj pa, ko poznavanje tega jezika vendarle malo upada in ko že dobrih 100 let radi prevajamo, je prišlo tudi nekaj novih prevodov njegovih del, ki jih ne želimo nocoj predstaviti. To sta torej ta 2 dela nocojšnjega srečanja. V prvem delu bomo predstavili tile 2 knjigi, ki jo bosta predstavila prevajalca in pisca uvodne besede, Jan Dominik Bogataj in Nena Bobovnik, ki jo vabim, da se mi pridružita za mizo. V drugem delu po glasbenem intermecu pa bomo šli še na drugi del, torej na okroglo mizo, kjer pa že zdaj pozdravljam in bom potem še povabil 3 velike modrece in bonaventuriance, da se nam bodo pridružili. Welcome also our distinguished guests to this evening that we might boni fieri, boni fiamus, bonaventuriani fiamus. We will present at the beginning the 2 new translations done by our young colleagues. And the second part, after a musical intermezzo, we will start with a roundtable on the importance of the times, writings, lives of those people from past that modeled not only their own times, but they influence ourselves as well. So at the beginning, we heard a nice Versiculus, ja. versicle that was made this morning in honor of St Bonaventure. To, kar smo zdaj ravno kar slišali, so odpeli naši pevci iz akademije, kjer je bil sestavljen, prav danes zjutraj je bil sestavljen ta verzikel v čast svetemu Bonaventuru, malce po vzoru tistega verzikla, ki ga poznamo pri svetem Frančišku. Kaj nam bodo zapeli kasneje, bomo pa še slišali. Zdaj pa predajam besedo kar Janu Dominiku Bogataju, ki je prevedel brevilokvi, in pa Neni Bobovnik, ki je prevedla, kako se izvajati dolg naslov. Kako se različne umetnosti izvajajo na teologijo in pa o trojni poti. Izvolite besedo.
Okay, thank you, Professor. I'm going to briefly present the book that I'm holding in my hands, this tiny book. And since this book consists of translations of Bonaventure's work into Slovenian, and since the target audience and the potential readers of this book are Slovenian people, I'm therefore going to talk briefly in Slovenian, if I may. Torej, predstavila bom tole knjigo na hitro. Sestoji iz 3 delov, čeprav je mala, ima vseeno 3 dele. In sicer v prvem delu bralec najde čudovit spremni esej profesorja dr. Branka Kluna. V drugem delu, ki je središčni del, sta moja 2 prevoda 2 Bonaventurovih del, in sicer to delo z dolgim naslovom, kako se različne umetnosti izvajajo na teologijo, in pa delo o trojni poti. Potem v tretjem delu knjige pa boste našli prevod 3 katehes o Bonaventuru, ki jih je imel papež Benedikt XVI v prevodu patra Mirana Špeliča. To je torej ta knjiga, ki se stoji iz 3 delov, in zdi se mi, da ta trodelnost knjige lepo soglaša in lepo sovpada z Bonaventuro samim in njegovim delom, ki ga je tudi sam zasnoval predvsej na trojnosti. Trojnost, njegovo delo, njegov opus je znamovan z trojnostjo, v čemer se Bonaventura opira na staro tradicijo svetega Avguština, ki je napisal vplivno delo De Trinitate o Trojici in govori o vestigia Trinitatis, torej o sledeh Trojice, svete Trojice v stvarstvu v svetu. In da vam ponazorim to trojnost, bom uporabila kar trojnost v eni izmed glavnih ved filozofije, metafiziki, in bom kar prebrala, citirala eno kratko poved iz Bonaventurove razprave o šesterodnevju, kjer se lepo vidi tale trojnost v metafiziki. Torej, Bonaventura pravi, da vsa metafizika, citiram, govori le o prvič izlivanju, drugič vzorih in tretjič dovršitvi, torej o razsvetljanju po duhovnih žarkih in povratku k najvišjemu. Torej, če povzamem še enkrat, vsa metafizika govori o izlivanju, kar je emanacijo po latinsko, potem o vzorih exemplaritas in pa o dovršitvi konzumacijo. Kako to človek razume in zakaj govorim o trojnosti in tem krogu, ki nas kot ljudi povrne nazaj k Bogu. Bonaventura torej govori o emanaciji, o izlivanju Boga, božjosti v svet in kot božjega stvaritelja seveda, in ko Bog ustvari svet in je vse, kar je zgolj božja ustvarjenina, je torej tudi stvarstvo zaznamovano z Bogom, ki je svet ustvaril. In potem tretja raven, torej če smo zdaj imeli Boga, svet, tretja raven pri Bonaventuri pa je človek, ki je zmožen to urejenost sveta in zaznamovanost strani Boga, našega stvarstva, doumeti. In zato torej emanacijo, izlivanje, exemplaritas, ker je vse, kar je na svetu ustvarjeno, pač po božji, človeka je po božji podobi ustvaril, in pa potem konzumacijo, torej použitje tega strani človeka, ki spozna, da je v bistvu ves svet ustvarjen dober strani Boga. Ta trojnost potem se vidi v celotnem delu, ta prvem, kako se različne umetnosti izvajajo na teologijo, kjer se Bonaventura sprehodi od mehanskih umetnosti do filozofije in vsem išče pot k Bogu in v zaznamovanosti vsega, od mehanskih umetnosti, od lova in kuhe do filozofije in višjih ved filozofije kot pot k Bogu. Torej, to je ta prva, bolj scholastična razprava, ki sem jo prevedla, ta druga o trojni poti je pa bolj usmerjena, se v bistvu bere kot duhovni priročnik lahko. Bonaventura namreč v njej govori o poti k Bogu, v čemer prepleta dve tradiciji. Prva tradicija je ta triplex via, kar je trojna pot, kar imamo v mistiki, pot očiščenja, pot razsvetljenja, pot zadinjanja. To prepleta in dela križišča z drugo tradicijo, ki je pa lekcijo divina, kar je meniška praksa, ki se stoji iz konsekvence lekcijo, oracijo, meditacijo, kontemplacijo, torej branja, premišljevanja, molitve in kontemplacije. In tako nas Bonaventura povabi na pot, če knjigo beremo, na 3 stopnjah. Torej najprej se moramo očistiti, potem razsvetliti in potem se zediniti z Bogom. Moramo, če nam to uspe. In na prvi stopni, torej poti očiščenja, jo razdeli, na poti očiščenja imamo spet 3 poti. Ena je pot, to so pa pol te mistične, prva stopnja ni očiščenja, ampak je lekcija divina. Torej na začetku začne z premišljevanjem, meditacijo, druga stopnja je oracija in tretja stopnja kontemplacija. Potem na prvi stopni, kot sem zdaj rekla, premišljevanje, meditacija, to pa potem razdeli na 3 podpoti, kar so te mistične, pot očiščenja, razsvetljenja in zedinjenja. In se potem vzpenja človek po stopnicah, ko to bere. In čeprav je ta knjižica torej tenka, mala, mislim, da lahko ponudi bogato branje za vsakogar, ki jo prime v roke, ker je vsaj v moji izkušnji tudi ob prevajanju, lahko seveda ta tekst preučuješ skozi diahrono prizmo in skozi zgodovinske vplive in skozi Bonaventurovo filozofijo, ampak je skoraj da vselej, predvsem pri tem spisu o trojni poti, branje sinhrono. Se dogajajo stvari v notranjosti človeka, in ko bere. Torej, toliko na hitro o tej knjižici.
Hvala. Bi smel mogoče še malo vprašati nekaj vprašanje. Kdo mislite bo pa raje segel po prvem, pa kdo po drugem delu, po Bonaventurem delu? Za koga bo zanimiva redukcija, za koga bo zanimiva triplex via?
Triplex via za vsakogar, sploh pa za tistega, ki se želi malo duhovne poglobitve in se želi povspeti, stopiti in se pospeti na poti k Bogu. Medtem ko ta de reductione artium ad teologiam, torej kako se različne umetnosti izvajajo na teologijo, pa je zanimiva po moje za preučevalce scholastike, seveda lahko tudi študente, lahko razne ljudi, ki preučujejo srednjeveško filozofijo in teologijo.
Jaz bi pa rekel, da je tale de reductione zanimiva tudi za današnje teologe, zato da se bi malce bolj ponosno ozrli na svojo vedo, ne da bi zdaj vse ostale vede zaničevali, ampak da bi videli, kako pravzaprav vse vede kažejo k njihovi, se pravi za neke vrste utemeljitev študija teologije. Mislim, da bomo dali na našo spletno stran na Teološki fakulteti kot neke vrste propagando kakšen stavek iz Bonaventura. Hvala, Nena.
Hvala. Zdaj pa še k drugi knjigi, ki kljub naslovu Breviloquium, kar pomeni po slovensko, bi lahko dobesedno kalkirali kot kratkorečje, ni prav nič kratka. Bom tudi jaz skušal na kratko predstaviti v slovenščini, na koncu bom dodal pa še en angleški povzetek, zato da bomo tudi naše tuje goste vključili. So, also myself, I will briefly present the work Breviloquium, which all of you who are English speakers or non-Slovenian speakers all of you are well acquainted with it, I'm sure. I will just add a brief summary at the end, some of my thoughts, in what terms we can reflect upon it. Torej, Bonaventura leta 1257 postane generalni minister reda manjših bratov. To je za njega ključna prelomnica v življenju. Dotlej je zasledoval predvsem akademsko kariero. Suo tempore doseže vse akademske naslove v Parizu, v tedanji najprestižnejši univerzi, vodi frančiškansko šolo tam, nasledi slovitega Aleksandra Haleškega in postane sam magister. Božja previdnost verjetno ga zaradi njegovih sposobnosti ni pustila samo za univerzitetnim katedrom, ampak ga je torej leta 1257 pokliče za naslednika Frančiška. Red je bil namreč v krizi in potrebovalo se je moža, ki je imel tako intelektualne, duhovne, kot tudi organizacijske sposobnosti, kot jih je premogel Bonaventura. In zakaj omenjam to letnico? Ker prav tega leta nastane tudi ta njegov slavni, sloviti spis Breviloquii. Dotlej Bonaventura vsa svoja dela piše kot akademik, se pravi tudi teologijo razlaga, piše, dela, snuje kot akademski profesor. Piše razlage Svetega pisma, piše traktate o teoloških vprašanjih. Tega leta pa se torej njegova vloga spremeni, postane predvsem duhovni oče svojim manjšim bratom, torej Frančiškovim bratom. In od te letnice naprej srečamo predvsem njegove bolj duhovne, mistične spise. In Breviloquii stoji nekje vmes. Torej združuje na eni strani to sistematično, akademsko teologijo, pa ne se ustrašiti ob tem, po drugi strani ga pa že napiše na prošnjo bratov, študentov, ki bi se radi naučili teologije, se pravi, bi se radi naučili govora o Bogu, razmišljanja o Bogu. In zato je tudi v tem vidiku en most, posebna sinteza. Kot bomo videli, je pa tudi sinteza ne samo recimo sistematične teologije in pa neke duhovne teologije, ampak je sinteza tako različnih filozofskih smeri, kot tudi predvsem njegov pristop k temu, da bi predstavil vse vedenje, ki je takrat na teh mladih porajajočih univerzah vznikalo, se pravi vse vedenje, ne samo teologijo, vse vedenje o Bogu predstavil v eni sumi. Ne? Poznamo Tomaževo sumo, poznamo druge poskuse tega, da bi to vedenje o vsem oziroma o prvem počelu, v smislu teologije, združil v eno knjigo. In v slovenščini imamo denimo odlomke Tomaževe sume teologije, nimamo recimo prevoda 4 knjig sentenc Petra Lombarskega, ki je bilo temeljno delo scholastične teologije, ampak to so teksti, ki so izredno nedostopni, ki zahtevajo eno poseben pristop, posebno razumevanje. Medtem ko Bonaventura v tem Breviloquiju dejansko celotno teologijo, vsa vprašanja združi res v enih takih 300 z velikimi črkami tiskane strani. Sijajna je njegova umetnost sinteze, ker tudi danes razlagalci predlagajo, da v njej vidimo si tudi kot nekakšno zgradbo, sestavljanje iz 7 delov. Začne se pri Božji trojici, potem pride v 4. poglavju o trojici, o stvarstvu, o učlovečenju, o grehu, torej spuščamo se od trojice, stvarstvo, greh, 4. del je učlovečenje. To je pa tisti obrat, turning point, ne, kjer se dejansko beseda učloveči in potem spremljamo nazaj reditus, se pravi neoplatonsko exitus, izhod, in reditus, se pravi nekakšna vrnitev nazaj. Potem torej od učlovečenja preko milosti, zakramentov in pa poslednjih reči, eschatologije. Torej celotno delo je zgrajeno kot neka katedrala, potem pa tudi vsak posamezen del kot nekakšni fraktale, bi lahko rekli. Vsak del, vsako poglavje je razdeljeno, je sistematično, je simbolika, predvsem trojice, potem števila 7 in res občudujemo, ko beremo to njegovo sposobnost, kako ne samo povzame različne tradicije, združi platonistične vidike, aristotelske vidike, združi avguštinstvo, torej dediščino Avguština, združi to svetoviktorsko šolo, te prve zgodnje, delno že scholastične teologije in gotovo ni namenjen samo teologom. Jaz mislim, da je ta knjiga lahko zanimiva za tiste, ki s teologijo šele začenjajo. Se bo morda zelo čudno slišalo, ampak zaradi te sistematike, ki se mi zdi, da jo v današnjem času po eni strani vseeno potrebujemo. Ne, da bi Boga zapirali v naše apodiktične trditve oziroma v naše sisteme, ampak upoštevajoč naš razum, lahko tudi mi, torej v času, ko je razum in človek in naše sposobnosti, naša ontologija razbita, postavljena v pesek, ko ne vemo več, kdo smo, kaj smo, moški, ženske, vse fluidno, se mi zdi, da so lahko scholastična teologija znova ovrednoti človekov razum, mu da do ene mere tudi nazaj vrne dostojanstvo, ker človek je kot od Boga danim razumom tudi sposoben razodetje razumevati in ga tudi razvijati, torej formulirati. Dejansko Bonaventura mislim, da zelo visoko ceni človeka. In v tem smislu jaz vidim en tak prispevek tovrstne misli, ki je sicer na prvo žogo malce tuja, ampak je lahko ravno zaradi te tujosti bolj nagovorljiva, ker se ne sliši sodobno, ampak če si priznamo, nas vedno nagovorijo tiste stvari, ki niso zelo naše, zelo domače, ki so malo drugačne, ki nas mičkeno izzivajo. Tako da vas vabimo, knjiga je narejena za to, da se jo prebere, tako da si jo boste lahko tudi oskrbeli. For the English speakers, I will just add some sentences, some thoughts I was reflecting on, in a sense that maybe we can start to ask, why do we need theological compendia as such? We know from antiquity, Periarchon from Origen, De Doctrina Christiana from Augustine. We know from the Visigoth Spain, at the end of late antiquity, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 8th century, we see this compiling force of mainly bishops, church, intellectuals, who try to preserve and to synthesize the theological thought based on revelation and to handle it down to the next generation. So I think we can see Bonaventura's Breviloquium also in this sense as an outstanding example of a theological synthesis that's approachable, much more than Peter Lombard's sentences, or even, I dare to say, because I wear this habit, even more than St. Thomas of Aquinas, which is sometimes difficult to approach. But if we look upon the antiquity and Middle Ages, and even until today, when we have catechisms, for example, we have now for more than 20 years a new catechism that's also a compilation of all different theological doctrines. And in this long line that stretches out through the centuries, I think Bonaventura's Breviloquium can be an outstanding example because of his extraordinary competences.
Mogoče samo na mesto dodatnega vprašanja en delček mojega izkustva pri branju tega dela. Bonaventura sem nekaj malega, res malega že srečal, ampak ko sem pa začel tole brati, sem pa rabil recimo 1/3, 100 strani približno, da me je stvar ne samo pritegnila, ampak da sem začel dojemati, kako to razmišlja, da sem vstopil malo v njegov miselni svet in potem je stvar postala bistveno bolj zanimiva. Torej, tisti, ki se boste lotili Breviloquija, ne ustrašite se prvih 2 delov, ampak ustrajajte, ker v nekem trenutku se bo zgodilo isto, kot takrat, ko berete kak roman ali pa ko berete v tujem jeziku. V nekem trenutku začnete stvari doumevati in razumeti, vstopiti v njih. In Bonaventurov Breviloquij, ki ni tako zelo brevis, ampak je pa brevis v smislu, da je na kratko vse povedano, je pravzaprav res kompleten tečaj teologije za brate. Mogoče pa še to pod vprašanje, za koga misliš, da pa dejansko to napisal? Brati so me prosili, da to napišem, to je tak lep izgovor, brati so me prosili, ja. Verjetno je on hotel, da bi brati to brali. Ampak kdo so zdaj ti bratje in zakaj? Zakaj bi njegovi bratje morali to prebrati? I want to ask him, who are the friars who asked him, or rather, who are the friars that he wanted that they might read the book. And that's why he said, "You asked me."
I will read a citation from prologue to Breviloquium, which I'm sure you all of you Bonaventure scholars know very well, where he's explaining the reasons why did he write this work. It goes about the young theologians that are trembling before the vast forest of Holy Scripture. How to get something from the Holy Scripture. It's in the 6th chapter of prologue. So bom v odgovor navedel tale citat, ki sem si ga pripravil iz prologa v Breviloqui. Prolog je poleg teh 7 del že zase, torej sam na sebi sijajen uvod v biblično hermenevtiko, se pravi, na kakšen način razlagati svetopismo. Bonaventura s pomočjo tistega Pavlove izjave o širokosti, dolgosti, visočini in še nekaj in dolžini svetega pisma razlaga poetičen, sijajen način, kako nekaj velikega je Božja beseda. In potem na koncu navede torej ta razlog, zakaj se je lotil tega pisanja. Ker je ta nauk v spisih svetih očetov in učiteljev tako razpršeno izročen, da ga tisti, ki pristopajo k poslušanju svetega pisma, dolgo časa ne morejo ne videti, ne poslušati. Zaradi tega tudi mladi teologi pogosto trepetajo celo pred samim svetim pismom, ker naj bi bilo tako negotovo in neurejeno, kakor kakšen temen gozd. Zato so me bratje prosili, naj iz svojega bornega znanja povem nekaj kratkega in jedrnatega o resnicah teologije. Njihove prošnje so me premagale in pristal sem, da pripravim nekakšen kratkogovor, v katerem ne bo zaobjeto vse, marveč se bom dotaknil samo tistega, kar je primerneje na kratko obravnavati, pri čemer sem zaradi razumevanja dodal kakšne potrebne razlage, kakor mi je dovoljeval čas. Tukaj razlagalci seveda na dolgo in široko špekulirajo glede resničnosti teh ozadij, ampak ravno za to gre. Tudi danes se mi sami znajdemo pred temnim gozdom svetega pisma. Kaj vse nam je stare zaveze ali celo nove, nerazumljivega ali pa nam nekako ni blizu, nam je težko za sprejeti, razumeti. In jaz mislim, da je naloga prave teologije dejansko izhajati iz svetega pisma in to z razumom in v obnebju te tradicije, v kateri smo, kar nam je izročeno, skušati razlagati na tak način, da bomo lahko to sprejeli, razumeli in tudi verjeli, da bomo kristjani imeli trdne razloge za svoje verovanje. In to se mi zdi sijajno zgradi Bonaventura s tem svojim breviloquium. Ko recimo en izziv dam bralcu, ki se mi zdi morda dober. Jaz mislim, da je treba breviloqui v taki obliki, kot smo ga ponatisnili, brati s svinčnikom v roki in iskati v vsakem dolgem odstavku različne trojice oziroma različne sklope misli, ki jih najprej našteje, potem pa vsakega posebej razloži. Torej, zakaj pravim, kot smo natisnili, nismo razdelili teksta povsem po teh, ker bi dejansko lahko sestavili, jaz mislim, kot nek načrt za eno gotsko, romansko katedralo. Ko pa dejansko pozorno pristopiš k tekstu in se pri vsaki alineji zamisliš, navdušiš, potem res zasije ena taka celota in si soočen z eno skladnostjo, z eno koherentnostjo nauka. Ne? Danes, torej kot sem že rekel, svetega pisma ne razumemo, težko razumemo, po drugi strani pa nauka pa tako več ne sprejemamo, predvsem zaradi morale, se mi zdi. Medtem ko tukaj res to bogatstvo katoliške doktrine v tem smislu, nauka, zasije z enim drugim žarom. To je moj vtis.
Malo bi popravil, ne svetujem vam svinčnikov, vzemite raje barvice. Ne zato, ker so pač bolj otroška stvar, bolj temeljna, ampak zato, ker jaz ne bi mogel z enim svinčnikom vsega tega podčrtovati. Je treba več barv, ker so več stopenj, potem pa imamo rumeno za to, rdečo za to, zeleno za to. I suggested rather than pencil, to read with a pencil, to read with the color pencils. To Nekaj trenutkov se lahko zdaj, preden povabimo naš akademski zbor, da nam zapoje v intermeco, si pa lahko vzamemo še nekaj časa za kako vprašanje z publike, če vas je kaj nagovorilo, če vas kakšna stvar izziva, da bi vprašali oba prevajalca in pisca spremnih besed, da vam lahko še kaj povesta. Če ni vprašanj, bom pa potrkal na vrata. Preden gremo na drugi del, torej na okroglo kvadratno mizo, pa mi dovolite še, da na kratko povem dve besedi o tej sliki, ki jo lahko gledate tudi na naslovnici brevilokvija. Trenutno visi sicer redno pred kapelo našega samostana. Bila je nekaj let, kar tako kot se dogaja s takimi slikami, kot se vsako pošteno, dobro literaturo zgodi, je bila nekje v kotu, zapozabljena. Potem pa se je odkrila in potem smo iskali prostor za njo, kje bi pa lahko na teh naših hodnikih še našli ustrezen prostor in našel se je ravno na levi strani pri vhodu v samostanske kapele. Slika je verjetno delo, zaenkrat mislim, da je neznanega umetnika, je pa iz Metzigerjeve šole, vsaj to, če ni morda celo Metziger sam tole izrisal. Gotovo so jo bratje prinesli, ko so prišli v ta samostan iz prejšnjega na današnjem Vodnikovem trgu in so jo imeli nekje, Bog si ga vedi kje, zdaj jo imamo na tem častnem mestu, tudi na častnem mestu na naši naslovnici. Druga naslovnica pa je vzeta iz našega sosednjega, bližnjega samostana, ne našega, pač samostana manjših bratov, ki je bil v neposredni bližini našega samostana, namreč na Kongresnem trgu, kjer je bil nekoč kapucinski samostan. In takrat, ko so ga rušili, da so lahko naredili prostor za lep mestni trg ob kongresu, so najbrž kar nekaj stvari pobrali in odnesli v bližnji uršulinski samostan, kjer je ta slika še vedno obešena. Seveda pa je Bonaventura tam v kapucinskem habitu, ki je malce kasnejši. Toliko o tehle stvari. Zdaj pa začenjamo počasi z drugim delom, torej z okroglo mizo. I'd like to present and invite our distinguished guest, Marianne Schlosser. She is from Vienna, and those who speak English know her better than I do, and I would not present more than in English. Slovensko pa samo to povem, da je velika strokovnjakinja za srednji vek in za bonaventurijanske študije, da se z Bonaventurom ukvarja že dolga desetletja in dosti podrobneje kot kdorkoli. No, po moje samo še eden bi lahko konkuriral v globini in širini njenih študijev. In drugi je pa William Short, ameriški frančiškan iz province Svete Barbare v Kaliforniji, ki sem ga srečeval kot prevajalca, ker obvlada tudi kot tolmača na naših generalnih kapitlih. Bil je tajnik generalnega ministra, je pa tudi velik raziskovalec in je trenutno predstojnik kolegija svetega Bonaventura, ki se nahaja v samostanu svetega Izidorja v Rimu. Prej je bil ta kolegij v Grotaferrati na obrobju Rima, še prej pa v Kvarakiju, ki ni Karači v Pakistanu, kot sem nekoč mislil, ampak je neka vasica blizu Firenc, kjer je bil ustanovljen pred več kot 100... When was Kvaraki founded? Torej 1887. leta je bil ustanovljen ta kolegij na zelo nerodnem kraju, kjer je bilo več komarjev kot ljudi, in so bili bratje silno veseli, ko so firenške poplave v 60. letih zalile, odplavile tisto središče in so se morali preseliti bliže Rima in zdaj uživajo v čudovitem irskem samostanu svetega Izidorja, prav sredi mesta, med pomarančevci in velikim vrtom, kjer je skupina raziskovalcev, ki pripravljajo stare izdaje naših velikih mož in seveda sem pa te pa še kaj malega popredavajo. Tam sem nekoč jaz stanoval, ko še ni bilo tega velikega središča, ko bi navaden samostan. Tam je tudi naš brat Jan Dominik Bogataj, kjer študira v tem središču, hodi sicer na predavanja drugam, ampak živi pa v čudovitem intelektualnem okolju, iz katerega prihaja torej Bill Short. Tretji, ki ga povabimo, je pa naš tudi že dober stari znanec Gorazd Kocijančič, katerega, če smem to reči, krsta se še prav dobro spomnim tam le zadaj, pred koliko leti je to že bilo, in ki je v slovenski prostor prinesel poznavanje in ljubezen do krščanske antike in krščanskega srednjega veka, ki je filozof, mislec, ki zna analizirati in sedanji čas in preteklost in ki je duša tudi kud logosa, ki je pripravil kar nekaj knjig, te knjige so tam le zadaj, nekatere, ki se dotikajo našega področja, so celo na voljo tam le zadaj na mizi in je s tem obogatil ne samo naše knjižne police in police v knjigarnah, ampak je s tem obogatil tudi misel, ki živi med nami v našem času. Lepo vabim vse tri. I invite, welcome all of you to the table, to the round square table o srednjem veku. Medtem, ko se naši razpravljavci bližajo mizi, tako kot so, bi pa vprašal čisto zaradi samega poteka, koliko od vas lahko brez težav sledi počasni, lepi, razločni angleščini. Lahko prosim dvignete roko tisti, ki lahko sledite angleščini. Ali je kdo, ki pa nikakor ne bi temu mogel slediti in potrebuje prevod? Tisti ne dvigne roko. Okay, I'm very pleased. Ker v nasprotnem primeru bi moral jaz še sproti malo si zabeležiti in prevajati in hvala lepa, zelo sem vam hvaležen. I'm very grateful for the public who understands English. And Gorazd, ti boš izbral sam svoj jezik, o katerem boš govoril in English. Gorazd will speak in English as well. So, tudi meni ne preostane drugega, kot da preklopim spet. Middle Ages are a very interesting era in human history. It's middle, but what's middle of the Middle Age? And is it really just a byword, or it is something important? If to be something in the middle, you need something before and something after. And I will invite our dear guests to tell us, is it really a change on one chair enough to start something, a big adventure of human history called Middle Ages? Is it enough that a certain Romulus Augustulus gives place to, who was him? Not before Theodoric, Odoacer, I think, Odoacer. Is it enough to start the Middle Ages, or is something a shift in thought? I don't know. I will give each of them opportunity to tell us what is the entrance to the Middle Ages, and what was the exit of the Middle Ages, and what's the middle of the Middle Ages. Just for the beginning, 2 or 3 minutes each, just to start, and then we'll we'll jump in the big adventure and see, is it important for us to know what the Middle Ages are, what they were? Do they have any influence to us? Please, can you start? Who do we give the first word? Ladies. Ladies first.
It's not always good to be a woman. But in the Middle Ages, it's not so bad to be a woman. I would say to separate periods from each other is a rather difficult thing. We are not so sure when the patristic times end. Some say with Chalcedon, some others with Gregory the Great, and some others later in the 8th century. So it is rather difficult in my eyes, and we should ask the question, when was the term Middle Ages used for the first time? Is it used in a kind of romanticism of the 19th century? Or is it used like aetas obscura, opaca, something very strange, as sometimes today? But I would say there are things typical for the medieval ages. The new orders of the 12th and 13th century show that spirituality is ecclesial, but becomes more and more personal. It becomes very important to have a personal relation with Christ, as you see in Bernard of Clairvaux, or in Francis, and in Catherine of Siena. And this is a second thing. In medieval ages, we have many women as writers. Hildegard of Bingen, or Clara of Assisi, who wrote the first regula for women, or Catherine, or Gertrud de Helfta, many of them, sometimes not very well known, but there are many of them. And you see that the Middle Ages is not only scholastic theology, there's also a broad stream of monastic theology, and also of mystical writings. So it is not It is manifold, I would say, and it is international, different from the time after the Reformation. In a university as Paris, you can study when you are born in Italy, or if you come from England, or from Germany, or from another country. There is a common language, and it's not so important to be born in a certain country or come from a certain nation. There is a community of teachers and students. This is, I think, an achievement of the Middle Ages.
It's a good question about the middle of what? I would say for me the Middle Ages is reflected already in some aspects of Gregory the Great. Because what we see is that great phenomenon of the massive migration of peoples now beginning to settle into what was the old empire. And I think that is the cradle, the beginning of the Middle Ages. The presence of new migrants adopting aspects of a new language and a new culture, but also bringing their own culture, language, and sometimes their theology. The end of the Middle Ages, I would say, is the beginning of the printed book in the middle of the 15th century. Something happens when you move from a world that only knows how to write by hand to a world in which books can be mass-produced and ideas take on a new value as commodities that can be sold on the market. So I would say for me that's the beginning and ending of the Middle Ages. And right in the middle of it, I would say, is Bonaventure.
Thank you. Miran, first, thank you for your kind presentation. I'm honored and humbled, as they used to say in such occasions, especially in presence of such distinguished scholars. But anyway, concerning your question, I think that Etienne Gilson, famous historian of philosophy, especially of medieval philosophy, hinted at the question when he, the answer to your question when he published in his history of Christian philosophy in Middle Ages, as first chapter, the presentation of apologists, Justin, Anaxagoras, and so on. And with that gesture, he just has shown us that the real caesura in history of thought and history of spirituality is synthesis of ancient culture and new Christian event, and that is I think very important. All the events and structures which were developed later in Middle Ages were just kind of organic development of that seed, which was sown in the beginning of that synthesis of ancient classical culture and Christianity. But concerning the end of Middle Ages, I think that the main problem is that we are not able to perceive how different Middle Ages are in terms of worldview from our times. We are defined by modern era, but by completely different ontology, which has suppressed the ontology of participation of all beings in creative and infinite ground of beings, and therefore was able with its life forms, with emotions and with thoughts to discern the presence of Creator in everything. And Bonaventura is, of course, an example of that kind of thought. I'm currently working on 3, in quotation marks, medieval projects in translation of Philokalia, in Eastern tradition, in Simeon, the new theologian hymns, which were published a few days ago. So you can say that I'm not only a philosopher and poet, but also merchant. You can buy hymns of divine love in new translations there. And the third project is Meister Eckhart's Opus Sermonum. That means Latin sermon, translation of Latin sermons of Meister Eckhart. And these three books are from various cultures, from Greek, Byzantine, and from late high medieval times. But you can see that they share very common spiritual and intellectual background, which we can design with broad mark or broad designation of Christian Platonism. And that was kind of culture which is really rooted in life form, in way of life, and is very, very strange to our own culture. And that, I think that's the problem.
Thank you to all 3 of you. When we speak about those, you did what in scholasticism we had to do first, to define the basic notion. What's the Middle Ages? Thank you very much. If we want to speak about anything, we have to have some common points. And if we want to speak about anything, those things must be different to be interesting for us. So, what are the common points? Gorazd pointed out that Middle Ages have different way of thinking, but there must be something similar. If it wouldn't be, it would be Etruscan language for us. So something completely ununderstandable. So what is similar and what is different between Middle Ages and ourselves today, modern times? And why, what makes Middle Ages interesting to you personally, maybe?
I must admit that the Middle Ages, for me, seems not so strange. I'm convinced that many questions people today have not changed in substance, but in appearance. These questions are: what is life? Why do we have to die? What is freedom? Love? Am I free and responsible to whom? And not only, does there exist anything divine anywhere, but is there a God who knows me? Not only do I know God, is there a God who knows me? These are questions, I think, deeply rooted in the human person. And when I look at the medieval authors, especially at Bonaventure and also Thomas or Anselm of Canterbury, or Katharina, I see that they faced these questions. And understanding history of thought, is also of a prophetic function for our times. And therefore, I have not so many problems looking at the Middle Ages. Some people are more near to me than some modern persons in politics or anywhere.
I generally tell my students that this is the sort of question that they should never choose for an essay. But I will try to give a reply. I think one of the great questions that people pose today is, can I have a relationship without an algorithm? That is, can I meet the other who is different from me? Must I always live in a bubble of those who think alike in order to be safe? And I think specifically in the 13th century, this was a tremendous question, and I think one for which they struggled to find an answer. Because the other for them was in part the Saracen, their word for the Easterner, mainly meaning Muslims, people of a different faith. What is our response? Through violence, religious warfare, the crusade, or through a peaceful encounter of submission and respect, the approach taken by Francis of Assisi. But they also had an idea of another that they were just learning about. The world of Asia, the eastern part of Asia, was just becoming known to them in the West. And they discovered that things that they had taken for granted and a geography that they had taken for granted suddenly was expanding into a kind of new universe. This is long before the coming to America for Europeans. Today, I think we face a constantly expanding universe, a quite scientifically demonstrable expanding universe, and I think we struggle for meaning in that. We can retreat into isolation. We face the other, the religiously, the culturally, the politically different, and we can be tempted to retreat into our bubbles of algorithms. I think the more courageous people in the Middle Ages show a way where you can be brave, you can do difficult things, and you can actually give your life in service of something that connects people rather than divides them.
Well, I must personally admit that I really esteem these great writers of Middle Ages like Maximus Confessor. Well, he's on the borderline between with late antiquity and Middle Ages, or Meister Eckhart as teachers, personal teachers, spiritual teachers. I have experience in reading and in translating them that they are not just talking about divine things and so on, but something is going on. These words are born from very intense spiritual experience, which is true, and which has that strange quality that it makes itself known as true. It transforms you when you are reading it, and it's very. I insist that it is very strange thought and spirituality for our times, but especially in our troubled times, I think that words of these great spiritual masters can transport us transport us effectively into realm of eternity, of God's reality, of truth in itself, and I think that's the main reason why we should keep on translating and presenting these works.
Thank you very much for. Let's have another round. You have all friends in Middle Ages, and you contact them regularly. You speak to them actually, and you make them speak to this world. So in a way, I could say you are living with one foot in the Middle Ages. But you are well rooted also in modern times. And that's why I'm sure that even in our postmodernity, you see not only vestigia, but also elements that survived Romanticism and that survived those times that labeled Middle Ages as epoca opaca, so as dark ages. Can you tell us something about the lights of Middle Ages that persevere today? So where are Middle Ages here among us? We have cathedrals that were built in those times, but not only stones remain. I think also the thoughts, books. Where do you see Middle Ages living and bright among us?
I can say what I would wish that remains, that is remaining. That is understanding man as image and likeness of God. It is, for Bonaventure, it is very important to believe, and that's not an insight you can have from natural reason alone. You have to believe that also a terrible person is created to be a saint. That's an act of believing, impossible without the grace of God. And this being an image of God is not something static. It is a dynamism. It is a challenge, because you only discover what you are created for if you are looking at your Creator. So the relation to God is so important to understand yourself, your personality, that you are precious, and therefore you can understand that the others are precious, created for the glory of God. And I would wish that this anthropology, born of Christian faith, would survive in our times. And what you said, it is true that we admire people who composed the Gregorian music or built up cathedrals. But it's not only this. When I read the autobiography of Edith Stein and her letters, she said to her philosophical friend Roman Ingarden, she wrote, people who built up these cathedrals and something like the Summa Theologiae of Thomas, it cannot be that they have not seen the truth. So what we share with the Middle Ages, it is not the habit. Even the religious habits changed or have changed. What we share with them, and what is for me the important thing, they are my brothers and sisters in faith. They are not so strange and they are not dead. They are alive. I do not hope, so I hope we are all alive in Christ. So, but they are alive, and we can try to understand their way of thinking about faith, and all of them, Meister Eckhart and Maximus Confessor and John Peter Olivi and others, they lived from these basics and tried to understand more because they loved what they wanted to understand.
A teacher of mine once said something that made me think quite a bit. Some of you will recognize the name, Father Giacomo Bini. And he said to me once, and he also wrote, we are no longer speaking of the signs of the times, but rather the time of the signs. And what he meant by that, and his specific example was Pope St. John Paul II, someone who had been able to capture the significant sign or gesture, a non-verbal form of communication, perhaps coming from his experience in theater, certainly, but also knowing that the images from this camera are going to have more impact than the words that I say at this Congress. The medievals, I think, and Bonaventure in particular, paid great attention to the way that signs communicate. They loved words. They wrote a lot of them. But they also understood how to communicate by signs. And I think in our contemporary culture, at least in the West, but I think perhaps in other parts of the world as well, we communicate much more by image now than words. And images probably communicate better than words many times. So I think something worth recapturing from the Middle Ages is the importance of signs and how we use signs to communicate. And the second element that I would add is the power of human affection. That rationality, reason, truth all have their place. But in a media environment in which truth can be manufactured, can be distorted easily, what's much more difficult to manufacture is genuine human emotion, affection. And if we build on images and on affections, rather than on words and ideas, I think we may capture another part of the Middle Ages that might be very important for our world today.
I would like perhaps just to answer in another direction, because we should admit that what we still inherit from Middle Ages isn't just good things. Philosophers, I will mention only two philosophers and cultural critics, Ivan Illich and Giorgio Agamben, Italian philosopher. They are both trying to show that most of the problems that we are facing today are inherited from medieval Christianity in one way or another. But Illich says it again and again, corruptio optimi pessima. We have the medieval structures, but they are devoid of any real Christian meaning. And that's a problem. We have inherited, for example, bureaucracy and so on, are things which are inherited from Christian, Catholic, especially conception of hierarchy, and are in secular context they're becoming something deadly instead of being something which makes alive, which is full of divine energy, it becomes something that is causing death. And that's one of scary aspects of Middle Ages, and we should not forget it.
We developed this idea. So the things that are bad heritage from the Middle Ages, before you go on with the good heritage, so things that we have to beware and take care not to repeat, to stop, maybe to resolve the problems, because every age has its own problems, and some are resolved, some are not. And obviously what you opened now is there was something very nice in Middle Ages, but also something bad. Can we? What's the way to recognize it, and what's the way to resolve those problems? Maybe you look at something.
John Henry Newman had written about this problem, that ideas change, and they can develop, and they can be a corruption or a degeneration. And it's not so easy to find out what is really a development, or is it a corruption? That depends from the regula or Maßstab. I do not know the English word. The Maßstab I would use to judge the development. So I think that's a general thing. And what I would say, C.S. Lewis, another friend of me, not a Catholic, but an intelligent man, said, you should read always an ancient book after having read a modern book. Why? Because the errors of the ancient book or the ancient times you will discover easily. But the old book or the ancient book will help you to discover the errors of your own days. You will be blind without a light from the past. And I think this is ressourcenorientiert, to think about the Middle Ages. What have they discovered, and what have we forgotten? So also to say, in the Middle Ages it was not all things golden. If you consider after Vatican Council II, many people thought we should clean the liturgy from some medieval things and to return to patristic Roman maturity, sincerity, without all these spiritual things. But afterwards, we discovered that it's not so easy to return to Roman times or to Roman liturgy without the spiritual Zutaten, wie sagt man das? Additions, not additions, but it's more than a cloth. It is a form of spirituality. There might be some strange things and erroneous things too, but there are also errors in our time.
There's a book about the 14th century. I like the title, A World Lit Only by Fire. And I think it sums up something very true about the Middle Ages. fire was used a lot, and not always to enlighten, sometimes to kill. So there is much in the Middle Ages to be retrieved, but I would say by a deliberate process of retrieval where we use a kind of discernment. And we ask, what is worthy, what is life-giving from the Middle Ages to bring into the present as a retrieval, and what needs to be left in the past? A couple of candidates for leaving in the past, I would say, is too close a relationship between the church and the state. That was something that seemed a great triumph of the medieval church, certainly under Innocent III. The relationship between papacy and empire seemed to have reached its maximum. Yet we can see afterwards the consequences that perhaps is not the best way for the church to go. I think a certain fanaticism about the truth that leads to the persecution of ideas. That is where people are not allowed to think because the thought itself might be dangerous, could lead to fire. And I think the third thing is the justification of religious violence, or violence on a national or an international scale that is justified by religious beliefs, whether Christian or other. I think that's part of the heritage of antiquity, late antiquity, and also of the Middle Ages, that I think we should try to push back into the past.
You said there are some errors in our time. I think that our time is absolutely disgusting. So welcome to tiny fascist state in ever more totalitarian Europe. It's horrible, everything. But let's talk about it. Where are there any medieval causes for that? For example, one interesting story goes like this. It is very developed in various books by representatives of so-called radical orthodoxy. It is thought by John Milbeck and others who try to show that modernity, in all its ugliest and nihilistic aspects, has roots in medieval nominalism. The great villain in this story is Duns Scotus. I don't agree with that narrative, but it is interesting because what I wanted to point out is that we have in Middle Ages great diversity of thought, plurality of views, and it is of course all basic roots of modernity were somehow developed in late Middle Ages, and we should not forget it. So
I love the word that Bill said, discernment. We have to look at the Middle Ages with a certain discernment to see, to evaluate, but we need some Maßstaben, some criteria, how to see, and everybody has his own background. So I think after that discernment, how to approach this beautiful and ugly times. We love Bonaventure. That's why we are here. We want to become Bonaventurians. But why would we at all look at these medieval things? Isn't modern time rich enough in itself? So if we let's now turn to see, why should we go that far without discernment when we decide about today's problems and today's difficulties that we have in our lives, in our societies?
I can only say about my own experience. when I began to study theology, I was not very excited. I was not very amused, and not to say disappointed. I had hoped when I was 18 or 19 years old, theology should be something like philosophy, but about God. That was my idea of theology. And then there was a split between, I felt at least, a split between reason and faith, between spiritual life, liturgy as celebrated by the church, and intellectual study. And I began to ask, has spiritual life anything to do with dogmatics? Or has dogmatics a place in spiritual life? Where is the connection between? This was my first semester, and I was nearly to give up. And then I discovered the Middle Ages. And first I discovered Thomas Aquinas by a lesson of a professor in philosophy who taught us metaphysics and epistemology and anthropology of Thomas Aquinas. And then I saw that there is a connection between reason and faith. And in Bonaventure, I discovered that there is a connection between love and intellect. It's one more connection. And therefore, I would say emotion is, to you, we have many emotions today, also in religious life. In my eyes, sometimes too many emotions, and not very mature and inordinate. So everything is measured. Does it good to me? What do I feel with this? You will be alone at the end with your emotions. But affection for Bonaventure is a motion of the heart. And the heart is connected to the intellect. And the emotion is not the last step. It goes to deeds. The head, the heart, and the hand must come together so that a person can fulfill what he or she is created for. And this I discovered in the Middle Ages, and not in Heidegger, and not in Kant, and even not in Kierkegaard. So therefore, the Middle Ages is not the only golden age of theology or philosophy. But there are highlights we should not forget. And when I read some modern author, I measure him or her on Bonaventure or on Thomas. I see also Duns Scotus. I also estimate Duns Scotus, but, and this is a question to you, is nominalism really Middle Ages, or is it just the changing to another epoch? It is a question, for me it's a question, when does the Middle Ages end? With printing books, or with losing the sense for the signs of the Creator in the created world? There are hints for a changing in Duns Scotus and in Ockham. I think we know that there is a changing, a slowly changing world in the 14th century. And this changing is also a growing distance between spirituality, mysticism, and intellectual life. This is what Jean Chasson complained, that many theologians and philosophers and students have many things in their mind, complicated things, books, but they do not know what pastoral care needs, what people need. And therefore it's also a split between pastoral care and academic life in the late Middle Ages. And we have this heritage also. Please.
On this question of discernment, what criteria can we use for the elements that are worth recovering or retrieving? And I think this conference is a good example of it. It's a kind of sensus fidelium. It's checking the sense of the people that if we present a message, for example, from Bonaventure or from Scotus, and we find that there is a group of people there who have really struggled to approach the Christian faith, the person of Christ, or the body of the church, when they've been presented with what has been the more common view that would be heard Sunday after Sunday. They hear this other vision. And as many of my students have asked over the years, can I believe in this way and still be Catholic? A Scotistic vision of an entire universe, a salvation history, a cosmos, all centered on Christmas rather than on Good Friday. To have a view of the world that we don't need to construct a world of abstract concepts in order to have a God, fundamental to the work of Occam. That actually this world, this concrete material world, without any other layers added on top of it, was good enough for God in Christ. Why isn't it good enough for us without a Platonic universe built on top of it? If we present these ideas and help people to understand that this is part of the broad Catholic tradition, and those people who have been on the periphery suddenly begin to find a voice and a vision that they say, that is what I have always believed, and that's why I thought I could not belong to the church. That is the good fruit that tells you that in your discernment, there is the work of the Spirit.
Well, yes, about, I think that I'm just editing a very interesting book by an Australian philosopher, Paul Tyson, which is entitled Christian Platonism for Our Times. And, well, he's trying to show that nominalistic tradition, Occam and Duns Scotus, were responsible for losing the ability to see intelligibility of creation, because the whole concept, on one hand, of a university of being and primate, which is given to voluntas, is and God's voluntarism, which is somehow slowly separated from human ability to be illuminated in intellectus and to see purpose and meaning of creation. It is a fundamental rupture in epistemology and ontology, and I think it is. Of course, you can say like that. Okay, it is one aspect, one kind of emphasis, and there are people who need just this. But on the other hand, it's also possible that it's very, very important rupture in the fabric of Christian perception of cosmos, of its beauty, of its purpose. I don't know. I'm just asking.
Thank you for your disagreement, even. But since time is going quite quickly, one of the last but complicated and complex questions, I would say, the hexameter is running through my head. Cur quomo do quando? Quibus auxilis, cur quomo do quando? So we all now entered just little to these Middle Ages. We remembered a few things that we heard about those long times. It's one millennium, actually, at least 1 millennium, with its ups and downs. And we are all now convinced that we cannot live without Middle Ages. They are part of our culture, being, thinking, believing. But now, with what means can we enter, or can we bring the riches of Middle Ages to the world today? Quibus auxilis. How and when should we open this box of chocolates and see what's to eat and what's maybe already rotten? So what are the means? What do you do in your work, thinking, believing, as a fruit of your love for medieval authors, Bonaventures, and all other people who you studied?
Always time is too short to consider all aspects. I would like to tell. So I'm teaching now since 35 years, and I'm not only teaching medieval theology, as the field is much broader. I not always say, this is a sentence of Thomas Aquinas, and this is the position of Duns Scotus, and this is Erasmus. I try to show the question in itself, a question about anthropology or Christology, or something that is interesting because it is a question, and it's not like bringing people in a museum. Simon Tugwell, you know the name, the famous Dominican historian, said you can enter history in a twofold way. You can study. You can study the works, the writings of an author, his biography, context, all the philological problems, and so on. You can do so, and it's a good basic for all the other things you will say about him. But you can also enter into Gespräch, colloquium, into a colloquium with an author and his work. and try to find out what he is telling you, what the book, Breviloquium or Triplex Via, is telling you to understand the question and the answer. And I think this is a good way. Many of my students said, I never thought this is a medieval thought. Or it's a medieval author you quoted in this or that section of a problem. And so I think we should remtene. Auctor sequitur.
Quibus auxilius. I think I would like to honor our authors this evening, Nena and Jan Dominik, because my first reply, what means should we use? And I would say, translate, translate, and translate. Many people in our societies today no longer have the study of Latin as part of their education. Certainly in the United States, very few people do. If our authors remain in Latin for the Latin Middle Ages or Greek or other Christian communities' languages, we condemn them to a kind of silence today. It's a kind of censorship. I think we have to make choices, strategic choices, about which authors and which works. I know that we have people here. I'm seeing my good friend Lydia Schumacher, who also works in this area, that not only to translate so that the word becomes comprehensible, but then I would say, considering the time of the signs, to exemplify that word by some gesture, action, or deed. Because the word alone has very little power today. So I think we must always allow that word to become flesh.
Well, that problem of transmission was has occupied me from the beginning of my writing career. My first book had title Posredovanja, which means mediations, Vermittlungen, and it was kind of an essay to put into contact modern words of Heideggerian thought, Lacan's thought, post-structuralism, and Christian tradition, especially a prophetic Christian tradition, Christian psychological insights, and so on. And that was, in that time, it was published in 90s, late 90s, and in that time, in our society, there was kind of dialogue going on between completely secularized or atheist parts of population and church. But now, I'm confused, but I have feeling that everything is degraded. It is, you have that very simplified woke culture without any dialogue in society. I don't know how it's now in States, but it's really, in comparison with 20 or 30 years ago, it's devastating from my experience. So I'm really at this point, I really don't know. I don't see, you know, with what, who is the addressee? Whom should what should I do to, for example, make Bonaventure or Meister Eckhart comprehensible to mentality of these times, if this mentality is so utterly without any concept or orientation or value? It is, I think we are entering in a new situation which is worse.
But I think we must not despair if we analyze and see the world as such. Maybe Bonaventure is bringing not a final solution, but part of it. And I very often reflect with the image of exile of Judaic people, of Judah from Jerusalem in Babylonia. And as a moment of deep crisis that was finally resolved with the Word that was made even clearer. The revelation was made clearer in those critical times, and I think we are, in a way, not masters, we are guardians of those beautiful thoughts, thinking medieval and modern, that as you did with your first book, we have to mediate them. And Bill said very nicely how to do it. With patience, with images as well, in the language that is understandable. Because to translate means to put in a language that people can understand. In Middle Ages, they didn't translate to Latin the things. They simply learned Latin and they spoke in Latin. Translation was not necessary. But maybe modern times really start with translations. When we don't understand each other, when we build new walls that are crushed down by translation, by transposition. And we are called to do this with our own experiences, as Marianne told us, how she entered the Middle Ages. But now, I think you all entered already in this dialogue. And the last word to the most important persons, that's you, who were very reverently silent, but now the word, the microphone is offered to you. Just please tell me who wants to enter in dialogue with Middle Ages, with our medievalists, who has a question, opposition, contradiction. Here are some who I know that know a lot of it and have a relation with Middle Ages and modern times. Be courageous. I shouldn't be as courageous as I am, but still. If I dared ask them. Yes.
Down to make it easier. Thanks to all the presenters for your great contributions. And I'd like to ask you, all three of you, simple question. Can we understand Middle Ages just on intellectual level without experiencing the conditions of people from that time? So, can we observe the life from the position of material abundance?
Be courageous.
Well, I don't know if I understood the question. If we are living in an abundant world, can we understand the world of scarcity, which is per definition the world of Middle Ages? Well, I think the problem is that people today are also living in scarcity, and that there were people in Middle Ages who lived in great abundance. So it is, it's a matter of perspective. I think that material abundance or poverty isn't the most decisive factor of dividing us from Middle Ages, or it's not the main obstacle in understanding. But perhaps the other scholars do not share my opinion.
I just have tried to explain that I'm convinced that the real questions of people, of persons, of human persons, do not so heavily change. They are similar. And there are examples. for this phenomenon. Think of Teresa of Avila. She felt misunderstood by all people until she got a book of Hieronymus and then of Augustine. And she felt he has understood me. And there is 1,000 years between those two persons. And when Edith Stein read the autobiography of Teresa, she also felt that there is inner Verwandtschaft, was heißt das? Verwandtschaft? Verwandtschaft auf Deutsch. Relationship, like a sister. We are near to each other. So time and circumstances of life may be important, but not always. Not always. I'm sure I would not share some arguments of Thomas Aquinas he took from Aristoteles. I'm sure I would not, and I have my reasons. But I would say, if Thomas Aquinas sat here with me and you, I would ask him, what did you think when you wrote down this sentence I do not understand? And I would not accept so. I could come into a talk, a discussion with Bonaventure or Anselm or others, even if I do not, I'm not of the same opinion. So, please.
I think it's always difficult to try to have a deep understanding of people who lived in such a different time. The past is a foreign country. What I think we can do to decrease the difference is to study the material culture of the Middle Ages. That is, not to take a history of ideas approach, but rather to look at the material culture of what did it mean to write? Did you use paper or did you use an animal skin? Where did you get it? How did you get it? What did it cost you in terms of food or labor to get that piece of parchment to write your commentary on the gospel? What are the relations among the people who produce that parchment, who make the ink? What's the impact on the natural environment from the act of writing? We begin to enter a little bit into the material culture of an author, and then we begin to build that intellectual system, but rooted in a real time, in a real place, abundant or scarce.
Thank you very much in your name. Je še kakšno vprašanje? Are any further questions from the public? If not, then I switch to Slovenian language. Hvala za pozornost. In pa tisto, kar je prej omenil Gorazd, da je mislec, pa je benem tudi malo prodajalca. Njegova knjiga je tamle prevod, njegov prevod Simona Novega teologa je tamle zadaj, pa tudi oba prevoda, ki ste jo pripravila Nena in Jan Dominik, sta na voljo pri tistile mizi, pa tudi še prevod Silva Novaka, Itinerariuma, Potovanje duše k Bogu, in pa tudi Jan Dominikov prevod Drevo življenja, Lignum Vitae. Te 4 Bonaventurove knjige, vse so danes s popustom, novejše in starejše, in vse 4 Bonaventurove dobite pa samo za 30 €, pa še eno dobite zraven, namreč frančiškansko intelektualno izročilo, ki pa je lahko kratek uvod v srednjeveško frančiškansko misel, ki je tudi tam le zadaj na voljo. Torej pri gospe Mirjam se lahko glasite in potem se obogatite, ne samo se razbogatite z nekimi materialnimi stvarmi in obogatite z srednjeveško miselnostjo in srednjeveškim Bonaventurovim verovanjem. Tamle zadaj, čisto zadaj, na hodniku pa vas čaka še, ker ste bili tako pozorni in toliko časa zdržali, tudi kratko majhno okrepčilce, da pridete potem lahko domov, da boste lažje potem takoj začeli brati nove knjige. Lepo vabljeni tudi jutri na znanstveni del simpozija, ki bo na Teološki fakulteti od 9. dopoldne pa do 8. zvečer, kjer bo 15 strokovnjakov spregovorilo o Bonaventuru. Če ne boste uspeli priti na fakulteto, če se bojite, da bo prevelika gneča, pa potem kliknite na spletno stran naše fakultete, kjer boste po 2 klikih že prišli lahko do prenosa preko Zooma in si boste ogledali toliko in tiste, ki vas bolj zanimajo. In pa seveda povabim še naše pevce, potrkamo na vrata, kjer se pripravljajo, da bodo prišli, da nas še pospremijo k zadnjemu kulturnemu in verskemu deju naše nocojšnje okrogle mize.
Stop.